Okay, so now we're going to turn to absolute rule in Russia. Okay, and Russia absolutism is most significant because it goes on for a lot longer than it does elsewhere. The greatest of these Russian absolutists is Peter the Great, the man on the left. He really begins to turn Russia into a more modern nation, and we'll talk about how he did that. Okay, but first a little background. Russia under the Mongols. In the 13th century, much of Europe had been conquered by the Mongols, okay, from East Asia. They created the largest land empire the world had ever seen. The Mongols dominate Russia for 250 years. Okay, they ruled by force but allowed the Russian princes to remain in power as long as taxes are collected from the Mongol ruler. The Mongol rule led to the rise of Moscow as the new center of power in Russia, and Kiev begins to lose its importance. By the end of the Mongol Empire in 1480, princes had evolved into czars, which is spelled either way as you see there, or the absolute rulers of Russia. Okay, begins kind of the absolute rule with Ivan the Third or Ivan the Great. Okay, Ivan believed that the Mongols' power had weakened, so he stops paying taxes to them and drives them out of Russia. He earns the title of the Great by building beautiful churches, and he also enclosed Moscow in a wall that will become known as the Kremlin, which is still the center of Russian government. After the fall of the Byzantine Empire, Ivan saw himself as defender of the Eastern Orthodox Church, and he begins to call himself Tsar, which means Caesar in Russia. He's followed later by Ivan IV, also known as Ivan the Terrible, and he became known as the Terrible because of the ruthless way in which he treated his subjects. Okay, he establishes several new social institutions. First, he establishes feudalism. Before Ivan, boyars or nobles had control of their own land. Ivan takes away the nobles' lands at will. He gives land to nobles who helped him during wars, and he sets up a feudal system similar to the ones used during Europe's Middle Ages. Serfdom. As the nobles became less free, so did the peasants. Traditionally, peasants had been allowed to move freely. Under Ivan IV, many had tried to run away to escape serving in the army or paying taxes. Some settled in lands to the south and east, and they became known as Cossacks. To prevent escapes, the Tsar makes the peasants serfs. They are now bound to the land and obligated to serve a lord for life. This change in social status is contradictory to what's happening everywhere else. Most of Europe, where serfs have been given their freedom. Russia will not abolish serfdom until the 1860s. That brings us to Peter the Great. Okay, so in 1613, the Russians crowned a new Tsar from the Romanov family. This family or dynasty would rule Russia until 1917 when they were overthrown. The greatest Romanov Tsar is Peter, and he rules from 1682 to 1725, successfully pursuing two major policies, Westernization and expansionism. Pretty much everything you will see regents-wise about Peter will have to do with one of those two things, especially Westernization. So let's tackle that first. As a young man, Peter had visited Europe. Okay, before he actually becomes Tsar, he visits Europe and becomes very impressed and fascinated with the culture of Europe and also the technology of Western Europe. He sees just how far ahead economically and industrially and militarily Europe is, the Western countries of Europe is, and he says, Russia, if we're going to become a major military power, we have to Westernize. He introduces a lot of reforms, and those reforms see a lot of pushback from the people that don't like it. Okay, he reorganizes his army according to Western models, and he creates a navy. He invites Western businessmen to Russia to teach Russians modern techniques, and he also forces serfs to work in mines and factories. Nobles are required to serve in the military or government. He also adopts Western fashions, and this is where he gets a lot of pushback. Men had to cut their beards. Women had to stop wearing veils. Okay, he does a lot of other pieces in this where he, they put a tax on beard. If somebody showed up in court with the old style Russian dress on, they would cut their boots down or make them shave their beards, cut off the type of coats they wore. He also moves the capital of Russia from Moscow to St. Petersburg, a city he had built on the Baltic Sea. And if you look at the map below, you'll see the green arrow shows you that transition. He calls this his window on the world. Okay. He also adapts as a policy of expansionism, and they aggressively expand through military conquest, fighting several wars, and he wins land all along the Baltic Sea, the areas that you see in the blue here. Okay. Catherine the Great, the other really great Romanov monarch. Catherine rules from 1762 to 1796 and continues Russian expansion, leading to her title the Great. Her military victories gained Russia a lot of territory in the south, including the Crimean Peninsula and other lands along the Black Sea, including Odessa, a valuable warm water port, because now you've got a port that is ice-free year-round. She also gains part of Poland. She also continues Peter's policy of Westernization. She is a big fan of the Enlightenment thinkers that we're going to be focusing on once we're done with absolutism. She invites Western European authors, artists, and musicians to move to Russia. She considers herself an enlightened despot. Western ideas reached into the nobility and the middle class, but the serfs are still treated ruthlessly. And in 1773, this enlightened despot crushes a revolt by the serfs. So make sure you've got good notes. Make sure you've answered the questions in the video.